Welcome everybody to my e4 e5 series. I'm going to be starting this series with the King's Gambit from Black's perspective. So I figured King's Gambit is one of the most legendary openings. It's one of the oldest openings in chess. It's a favorite of the the romantic players of the 18th century. So if historically we started out with the King's Gambit, I figured we could start the series with the King's Gambit. So the e4 e5, White tries the King's Gambit. So I don't think there really are many options besides accepting the Gambit. I think accepting the Gambit is by far Black's best option, and Black has the most amount of options within the King's Gambit accepted. So in this video, I'll only be covering knight f3 on move 3. So there's the bishop Gambit as well, and there's also knight c3, there's also d4, but I won't be covering those today. I'm just going to be looking at knight f3. So here, Black has many options, which is why I think the King's Gambit accepted is so good. Black has the main lines, g5. Black can try to liquidate the position with a modern defense with d5. Black can play a shallop and try to take over initiative himself. Black can play d6, the fissure, and sort of delay d5. And there's even stuff like h6, f5, knight c6. I mean, these are all moves. So Black really has a lot of options in the King's Gambit accepted. But today I'll be looking at bishop e7. So this is the Cunningham defense, and this is a rare bird. Looking at the lichess database for 2000 and up rating, only 12% of games have bishop e7. So bishop e7 is going to catch most King's Gambit players off guard, and well, the Cunningham defense really has a very straightforward idea. It's just Black is really stubborn with this idea of checking on h4. So on move 2, Black captures on f4, and Black wants to play queen h4 check. So White plays knight f3 to stop that check, but Black persists with his idea of giving a check on h4. He plays bishop e7. So now we're going to be looking at 5 moves. We're going to be looking at the main line with bishop c4. We'll look at that a little bit later at the end. We'll be looking at bishop e2, which is a rare move, but is one of the best moves according to the computer. We'll look at d4, which is popular, knight c3, which is decently popular, and we'll be looking at h4, which is a blunder. So first let's look at h4. So for whatever reason, this is the third most popular move with 10% of game, or 11% of games. So I'm just going to be showing how to refute h4. So h4, on its own, it kind of makes sense because White doesn't want there to be any sort of checking on h4. So h4 stops that physically. So we have to change plans here. We play knight f6, and we're targeting this pawn. White has to defend it, and White can also attack our knight with e5, but that just transposes. We're going to play knight h5, and then White's going to play knight c3 at some point. Anyway, so knight c3, we castle, and White can play d4, and this is sort of our idea of knight f6. We want to play d5, but under better circumstances. So we first play knight f6, and then here we play d5. So e5, knight h5, and the main problem of h4 is sort of made evident here because this g3 square is really nice for a knight, and White just has so many holes on the king side, and yeah, I mean Black has very easy activity on the queen side, and also holes to exploit on the king side. So this is just awful for White. This is completely losing for White. Bishop d3, and yeah, I mean we're just going to continue knight g3, c5, knight to c6, and you can bring bishop to g4 or to e6, and this is just positionally completely losing for White. Okay, so now let's take a look at knight c3, which is the rarest move on this list besides bishop e2, knight c3, but we'll look at it anyway. So knight c3, we give a check. So this is sort of the common theme of the Cunningham defense, where we want to give a check on h4. So against knight c3, we give a check. And white has to play king e2. So this is sort of our idea. The idea of the Cunningham is to first give a check, and then we can play d5, which is basically the same as the modern defense, except under better circumstances, because we inserted a check, and white's king is displaced. So, check, king e2, on d5. And this is a gambit of a pawn, so white can take it with the knight. But the point is that, well, we got white's king to move. So now we have a king to attack with knight f6, and well, we're leaving a bishop hanging here, but we're also attacking this knight as well as attacking this pawn. So if white tries to take this bishop, we could take on e4, and we have a fork on these two knights, so we actually are up in material, and white's not really left with many options except to trade. So knight takes, and then queen takes. And material's even, but this white's king is really not well placed, and there's actually a cool way of getting in, as I'll show. The main line here is to play d3. So white wants to chip away at this f4's pawn, because this is kind of a thorn in white's position. But here we play bishop g4. This is sort of our plan. We want to play bishop g4. Our general setup is to play bishop g4, and then castle queenside. So either knight c6, knight d7, and then castle queenside, and then just unleash an attack on this king. So d3, this is the main move. We put bishop g4, and now white should try to get rid of this pawn. But here we slip our queen over to b6, and we're trying to enter here, and it's actually kind of a problem, because if white tries to take this pawn, we have mate in 2 actually. So white has to drop back with the king. And here we just guard our pawn, and then we drop our bishop back to h6. So once white plays king d1, which is the only move, we can drop our bishop back to h6 like so, just to keep our pawn as a thorn in white's position. And yeah, if white tries anything else here besides king d1, we just get into the queen and we win. All right. And if white doesn't play queen d2 here, then we just, we do a standard plan of knight c6, castle queenside, and we should have a winning attack. So white's options are really limited here. Okay, but the most popular move here is to play d4. And against d4, we still play our same plan, bishop g4. And if white tries, white's best plan again is to try to chip away this f4 pawn. Here we just have to defend it. We don't have queen b6 here, so we just defend the pawn. King d1, white's best option still is just to run with the king. And here we have to play knight d7 and long castles. So why does knight c6 not work here? Yeah, against specifically is queen d2, king d1, c3 setup. Black actually has to play knight d7 long castles. Whereas normally black plays knight c6. So why doesn't knight c6 work here in particular? Knight c6, white gets this setup of king d1, c3, king c2. And here's why it doesn't work. White just plays bishop t3, and there's nothing black can do. Whereas with knight d7, c3, long castles, if black has knight c5 here, and then bishop d3 is prevented. So very small detail, but sort of important. But it isn't the end of the world if you play knight c6. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, now let's take a look at if white doesn't play queen d2 here. So just for illustration, if white plays something like queen d3, which is the most popular move here, we play knight c6. So against literally everything else besides this particular setup, we can play knight c6, long castles, and we're just winning. So for example, here we're already threatening stuff on d4. we're just chopping through here with bishops, and we're putting loads of pressure on d4. So after king d2, yeah, if white plays king d1, then we can sacrifice on d4, and we win a queen, actually. If king d2, this knight's no longer pinned, but we can play this move bishop f2, and this is a really funny way just to put even more pressure on d4, and white's completely busted here. So yeah, I just put that line in there just for illustration to show how, in general, this plan of long castles and knight c6 is crushing, leads to a crushing attack. So yeah, knight c3 is not a particularly good line, but it's something that people have tried, so I figured I would cover it. Okay, next let's take a look at d4. This is the second most popular move. So here we just do our normal plan of bishop h4 check, king e2, now we play d5. So this is, again, this is the thesis of the Cunningham defense. We give a check and then we play d5 99% of the time. So check, king e2, d5. Now white's most popular move is to play e5 here, and we just do the same stuff. This is literally the setup we do anytime white volunteers a check and has to move his king. We give a check, and then we play bishop g4. And yeah, we just rip open the center. So this is all you have to do. It's really simple, really. Whenever white moves his king, you just open up the center, long castle, and attack it. And it's not really rocket science, all right? So d4 is no good, but it's the second most popular move, so I figured I'll cover it. Okay, now let's get to the actual meat. So let's start with bishop e2. This is not a popular move. Only 1% of games have bishop e2, but I'm just going to cover it anyway because it is one of the best moves. So here we give a check. So just the normal, the normal drill. Bishop h4 check, but here white has a slightly better square he could put his king, just f1. And actually black doesn't have much better to do than just to drop back with the bishop at this point. So against bishop e2 we give a check and then we drop back, and then we look to play d5. So knight c3 is the best move, and because that makes it difficult for us to play d5, so what we do is play c6 and then d5, and then we just develop our knight. And this is a very pleasant position for black. Actually, black has a significant edge here. Black can develop either to f5 or to g4, maybe execute a trade here and then play c5 and castle short. So this is actually quite good for black, especially considering white doesn't have the ability to castle. Now if white plays d4 here, it should just transpose. You just play c6 and it's the same stuff. So knight c3, same stuff. You play knight you play knight f6 here, just intensify pressure. Oops. And then e5, knight e4. And if white tries a trade, then this is actually really bad for white. This pawn actually is difficult for white to target. Oops. And this is actually quite good for black. So bishop e2 is actually pretty easy for black to handle. Even though the computer says it's quite good, it's pretty easy for black. I think black just gets a really easy game here and a slight edge. But I covered it anyway because it's one of the options the computer suggests. Now, all right, enough with the dilly-dallying. Now let's talk about the actual main line, which is bishop c4, which is by far the most popular move and is the best move. So bishop c4 is sort of makes this difficult for us to play d5. Also, it provides white with an excellent square for his king on f1. So against bishop c4, this check actually isn't so great. It's playable, but I think white gets really nice game because white has really good control over d5, and also white still has the means of playing d4 while we don't have the means of playing d5 easily. So it's very pleasant for white there if we play bishop h4 check. So I recommend playing knight f6. This is the main line. So this is what, if you're going to study anything, this is what you should study. and against everything else you can just remember bishop h4 check. But against bishop c4, knight f6. Now white has this move e5. So if white doesn't play e5, for instance d3, we can just play d5 because now we have a knight supporting it, and that's actually really good for black. If white tries knight c3 to stop d5, we can do the classic fork thing. So black has a substantial advantage here as well. So e5 is virtually forced, and here play knight e4. And this is where it gets a little bit spicy. So, okay, first of all, I'm gonna cover the computer line, just to get that out of the way. The computer line, which basically nobody plays, only 2% of games on lichess have this computer line, is bishop d5. And against bishop d5, play knight g5, and yeah, we just play d6. So against bishop d5, we just play knight d5, d6, and we're threatening to take this pawn with a discovered attack on the bishop. So white usually plays knight c3 here, and to defend the bishop, and then we just play knight e6. And yeah, this is kind of all you have to know. It's a pretty stable position, and no one's going to play it, so you shouldn't have to worry about studying it. By far the most popular move here is just a castle, and other moves tend to transpose. So if white plays something like d4, it should just transpose to a similar sort of position. Black's plan here is to play d5. So basically whatever white plays, you want to play d5. Of course, bishop d5 is the exception, but against almost everything you play d5 here. So castle, we play d5. D4 you play d5. Even d3 you play d5. So d5 is the move to remember. Castle is d5. And there are two types of structures that can arise here. So either white captures en passant, or white does not. So it's more popular for white to capture a pawn. So I'll look at that first. Capture en passant. This is the first kind of structure. You recapture with the knight, and here you play g5 and we short castle. And yeah, this is a very dynamic position. Black is up a pawn, so I think of course black has some weaknesses on the king side, but this is pretty exciting to play. So yeah, I would suggest you study this a bit if you're interested, or you can just remember it up to here. Yeah, the general plan is a short castle. I think there's some variations where black long castles as well, but because the position is so open, it's safer to castle short, in my opinion. Okay, so that's the open position. So I call this the open variation of the Cunningham, where you just play g5 and short castle. And then there's the closed variation, which is basically everything else. So if white tries to play, well, the bishop's under attack, so bishop d3, we still play g5 because we want to support this pawn. And then yeah, here in the closed variation, it's the same thing except this pawn remains and this pawn remains. So these two pawns remain on the board. And because it's more closed and white has this pawn, instead of castling kingside, I think it's safer to castle queenside. Also, black gets to have some activity on the king side, and it's easier to attack on the king side because the position is closed. So it's both safer and allows opportunities to attack if you castle queenside. So in the closed variations, where white doesn't take en passant, castle queenside. So just play knight c6, bishop e7, bishop e6, queen d7, long castles, and launch some sort of attack on the king side. So that about covers the Cunningham. I think it's a very good weapon against King's Gambit. I mean, you could play your main lines. You could play d5 if you just want to draw, but I think the main lines is just too theoretical, and white has too many options there. And d5, well, I think white can equalize against that pretty easily. And then a schalp is the best move according to the computer, but it's also, I think, really difficult for black. So that's why I think the Cunningham is quite good. So if you're looking for a defense to the King's Gambit, you can try out the Cunningham. Alright, see you in the next video of the series.